Hi, Luke. Welcome to BizTalk. It's my great pleasure you with me today. How are you?
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about yourself, a bit of your background.
So I have quite a varied background, lots of study, that's for sure. So I'm a scientist, inventor. So I studied maths first, actually wrote this book, Brief History of Mathematical Thought. But I also studied architecture. I have a degree in architecture. Went to art school some time ago, signed this jug. So lots of things in my past. The most relevant is I have a PhD in biophysics. So I spent 11 years at the University of Oxford doing research into fungal networks. And it was really that started this business idea. So I'd sort of had enough of academia. I wanted to do something more consequential. And I developed this method for making a new kind of material. It's a light transmitting material, thermally insulating and carbon negative.
Okay.
So I recently had a patent published. So I've got a patent pending, and it's published in August. And I'm just trying to commercialize the idea. So the material, I decided to call it POMB, because I've got 10 Kiwi cousins.
Before we start talking about POMB, how did you get into this idea? What has been your driver?
Well, it seems to me that fungi have been neglected. So I've done a ecophysiology research. And so I think, so basically I was thinking that fungi are underutilized. So there are some mycelium-based products going into the building trade. So companies like EquityMatch or Biome or Mogu. But I think the way fungi are being used is suboptimal. Lots of opportunity for improvement there. So it was really that. So I was thinking, like I said, I spent 11 years studying fungi. I have a degree in architecture, so I was thinking about how fungi should be used by the building trade and strategizing about that. That was what really inspired it.
It's very punctual. Yeah, we really need to go to negative when it comes to carbon emissions, and we need to be light when it comes to constructing, right? I studied my first 2 years as being an architect. After I understood that I was not going to be an architect, and so I gave up my first university. And building is still in quite old-fashioned mode. So I agree it should be, in somehow reinvented, let's say in this way. Anyway, let's talk about POMB.
Yeah. So, well, like I say, I called it POMB because I've got 10 Kiwi cousins and I'm a POMB. I thought it was a good name. And the problem opportunity is really a massive one. We're building about 11,000 buildings a day at the moment, not including little shacks and things like that. And global spending on building construction and renovation is now £10 billion a day. And about 2 billion of that is building envelopes. So I don't have any technical suggestions on how to improve the foundations or the structural frame. But once you have a frame, you need to weatherproof it. Right? And it's that I want to use this material for. And I would say, if you talk to architects, it's clear there's four things. Well, there's many things that are desirable in a building envelope, but I think there's four that are really most pressing. It has to be affordable. That's non-negotiable. Obviously, people want energy efficient buildings. That's been on people's radar for quite some time. So good quality insulation, high, low U value, good insulation. And of course, people want natural light. Nobody likes gloomy buildings. But the final one, which is really going up people's priority list very rapidly, is low embodied carbon. The carbon cost of the construction phase as opposed to the use phase, that should be low too. And getting all four at the same time is very challenging, in particular because glass is just a terrible insulator. Even triple glazing is a very poor insulator. So people put in windows for the sake of natural light, but then their energy efficiency goes out the window.
Yeah.
Or another popular thing is you have a inner shell and outer shell, and you fill the space between with polyurethane insulation, which is very affordable and makes your building very energy efficient, but you can't make that foam without a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the big challenge, getting all four at the same time. There's another sort of fundamental challenge, and that is if you want to make a low carbon building material, a carbon negative building material, you need to build out of something that would have released greenhouse gas if you hadn't used it. Yeah. And that's easy enough to do. People have been doing that for since forever. A thatch roof or a fob wall. So in medieval times, farmers were major suppliers to the building trade, but of course that supply chain has been completely displaced by brick and concrete and the like. And there've been many unfortunate consequences of that, but the really striking one is stubble burning, which is a massive problem. Greenhouse gas emissions from stubble burning about double that of aviation, and the smoke kills about 1,000 people a day. They're a major health hazard. So my proposal is a win-win co-production model. So you go to the farmers. So this would be in the business model is somewhat different in different parts of the world, but if we're doing this in India, say, you go to the farmers that are currently burning their stubble, and you say, don't burn your stubble, you'll get free mushrooms. So you collect their stubble, you mix it with fungal spawn and put it in a simple closed chamber. So instead of having a bale of hay on their lands, they have a plastic thing stuffed with straw in it. And after, say, 3-4 weeks, mushrooms pop outside, and those are for the farmer. That's payment, essentially, for not stubble burning, and incentive to avoid stubble burning. And then what we would take as a feedstock for our building material is mycelium biocomposite. And so mycelium biocomposite, I think the first patent for that was about 2007. So it's been around for a bit. It's great stuff. Essentially, the fungus grows through the straw and sticks little bits together. And that is great because for the same reason that a log is not very flame retardant, but a bag of wood shavings is very flame retardant. Once the straw is all stuck together by the fungus, it becomes far, far less flammable. Just because it's a big lump, and when you try and burn it, you just get char, which stops the volatile gases coming out. So, and also, mycelium biocomposite is a really good insulator. It can be as good as polyurethane, and it certainly can be as good as, say, rock wool. And the fungus growing through the straw makes it a better insulator. Just makes the air pockets a bit smaller. So what we do is how POMB essentially works. Some of these details are commercially sensitive, so this is a rather conceptual sketch, but still, the basic idea is you have a plastic shell, and the plastic shell is stackable. So you can make that in a big factory somewhere, stack it up in a shipping container and ship that, and that's light for a building material. But most of the weight of the product it isn't shipped, it's sourced quite close to the building site. And so what you do is you take your shell, you fill it with light guides. So that's a thing that lets the light pass through. It's a transparent shell. You also fill the rest of the space with mycelium biocomposite, which is very cheap. It's thermally insulating and flame retardant. And also you could have the outermost layer, so what you see through the plastic shell could be chosen for aesthetic reasons. So pressed flowers or autumn leaves, something like that. And the net result is a sort of Lego-like block that it's very easy to stack up, sort of click into place. Quite large blocks is the plan, so maybe 1.2 meters by 30 centimeters, but not so big that one person couldn't put it into place. And yeah, so the key points are it lets light through. So it's not like frosted glass or something that lets a huge amount of light through. It'd be significantly less light than that, but some light through, dappled light through. And it's a much, much better insulator than glass, which is quite easy to achieve. Like I think glass is a terrible insulator. And the other critical point is that because the carbon emissions from making the shell are quite small compared to the carbon emissions you're saving by storing organic stuff, so preventing it from rotting, or even better, preventing it from being burnt. And so each square metre of wall, say, should sequester about 20 kilograms of straw, slightly depends on how you're doing it. Whereas a brick wall typically releases 36 kilograms. So it should really help with the carbon cost of construction. So the business model, so yeah, we're not going to make the polycarbonate shells. We'll get those from a plastic supplier. And it's a co-production model with farmers. So we put those together. So the early stage really is the left-hand side of this, is that we're designing products, hoping to get into design magazines and get talked about, so inspiration, and also in the long term, provides products for the building trade. But ultimately, we're going to be a material supplier for the building trade. So that's where the serious money comes in the future. Now, there's timing issues with all of this, because no matter how charmed architects may be by this whole idea, they can't actually put it into their buildings until A, the supply chain is in place, and B, their insurance will cover it. And so although, say, a roofing system is a very sensible product to make out of this material, people aren't going to make a building and have a very experimental roof until their insurance will cover it. So it has to be fully certified and shown to be, fire safe and have all of the required legal properties. But not everything has those same requirements. So a garden room doesn't have those same requirements because you don't need planning permission to put one up. So garden furniture essentially is a shelter in the world. And so the early stage is to make proof of concept prototypes and have workshops with sort of art world architects, the kind of people who can do projects where the insurance issues aren't anywhere near as pressing. So sort of art world pavilions. If you're doing a stand at the Venice Biennale or something, insurance issue isn't pressing. You have art world insurance. And also, I'm keen to partner with the School of Architecture, because the way this stuff could be used, the impact it could have on architecture, that's a very lot. There's a lot to think through there. And so the plan is to do workshops with the School of Architecture and let the students work, develop ideas involving this stuff, but we'd retain IP rights, and in return we'd agree to hire some number of students at the end of the year, something like that. The medium term, so the first source of revenue is going to be a modular garden room kit. And so the key points here is that it's relocatable, right? So these blocks, you stack them up and you can dismount them. It's not, not like putting up a tent and down, but you can relocate it. It's easy to install. So a key thing with garden room kit, I mean, the dream is you ring them up and say, oh, I want a new room in my garden. And they come and they whack it up in just a few days and they're gone. And you don't need planning permission. It's very easy. And of course, it should be attractive. The idea is essentially it will be quite a high margin designer thing at the beginning. And then, like Tesla, you bring your margin down as you try and take over the world. And I suppose the thing I'd say about that is there's quite a big market for garden rooms in the UK. I mean, obviously nothing compared to building envelopes as a whole, but I think it could generate some decent money quite soon. The long-term plan is, of course, extremely ambitious. And I'm keen to expand into Asia because that's where the stubble burning is. So I already said about just a square metre, what impact that would have, that minus 20 kilograms compared to say 36 kilograms for brick. If you look at a kind of global scale, a 5% reduction in conventional building envelopes and a 5% reduction in stubble burning would save about 100 million tonnes of CO2 per year and about 100,000 lives per year. And what's interesting about that is that the reason I've got that little pie chart that shows more stubble burning than brick is that most of those carbon savings and lives saved would be from the stubble burning, not from reduction in brick manufacture or concrete manufacture. But there's not lots of money to be made reducing stubble burning. but the 5% of the market of building envelopes is just an absolutely colossal sum. So I think this cleverly pairing up these two potential ways of having a very positive environmental impact is quite key. So why now? Well, mass urbanisation. There's really a lot of buildings need to be built, going up to about, I think, 15,000 a day by 2050. And of course, there's a lot of money. These are figures from the International Finance Corporation. There's two huge trends in the building trade, which we're definitely tapping into. One is biomaterials. So like I say, you can get insulating panels, for example, made of Massimiliano biocomposite, things like that, acoustic panels too. So the building trade is getting used to more biomaterials, and the reason for that is a very good one. Carbon cost of construction is just increasingly pressing issue, and you can't beat biomaterials for that. Then there's another broad trend, which is also very important, which is that of modular construction, and that's largely a kind of like a labour issue thing. So perhaps it's constructed to compare bricks and what I'm talking about. So bricks, nice old bricks are rather charming because each one is different. These very mass-produced bricks, where they all look the same, a lot less delightful. So I think one of the big ideas, I suppose, is that if you have an organic inside and a plastic outside, in a way you get the best of both worlds, because the size of the thing will be completely standard. They'll be, you'll know they clip together very quickly and easily. But because it's a plastic shell and then an organic interior, each one will be slightly different, visually at least. And with brick, you put the brick, you put the mortar, you can definitely do that wrong. That's actually quite a skilled task. And it's a task that has to be done outside. And health and safety on building sites is often a real issue. Air pollution on building sites is often way above legal limits. So in places like, say, London, where there's real labour issues are a concern, labour costs are high, and if I say I can do it for twice the price, but I'll do it twice as quickly, someone like London, people might say yes to that, right? Because the cost of tying up a building site is very considerable. So the kind of places where I think this might be even cheaper than brick would be cities where there's labour issues and where speed of installation is an important factor. And the other thing I want to mention there is end of life. I think I have reason to believe that the story of Detroit isn't going to be a one-off, right? There are quite a few cities will grow larger and then smaller again. And in Detroit, because it's a nightmare, you build all these things, they're not needed anymore, and then demolishing them is a real pain. So a building method that you can dismount is I think, a big advantage. So yeah, finally, why us? Founder opportunity fit. So me, it's my patent. I kind of have to be involved. Yeah, we talked at the beginning. I have a somewhat unusually varied background because I've always really been interested in shapes, why things are the shape now. So I've got a couple of partners, co-founders. So Edem is my business guru. He's great, really smart. Management consultant with Innovation Consultant of the Year, 2019. So
great.
That's impressive. And then Ben Allen, who I'm extremely pleased to be working with. So he's an award-winning architect. The Zine magazine are very fond of him. They put him on their list of the 20 best emerging architects in the world. He just recently won a very high-profile prize. So I guess the second highest profile architecture prize in the UK. Don't Move, Improve. But instead of talking about how great it is, just some images of his work. So the bathroom on the right always cheers me up when I see that. That's a properly nice bathroom, and he's done some quite relevant things. So the so these blocks, they support their own weight, but they're not, they're for infill, right? They're not a structural frame. So for a garden room kit, we will need something that helps take the load, right? The roof will need something to help take weight. And the CNC cut plywood things that slot together and be unslotted is, I think, the best way to do that. And Ben has done, that's kind of one of the things he's noted for us, is having developed systems like that. So that garden room kit, so the thing on the left is a CNC cut metal frame, and he's done a garden room kit before. So that's my slides and my pitch, I suppose. I guess the final thing to say is it's still early stage on the fundraising. There are people who are interested. I'm talking to quite serious institutional people, and we're still working out the short to medium term financial model. So we're not really quite ready for market valuation and things like that yet. But I am interested in joint ventures and investment. And I do think it could really have an enormous social and environmental impacts, and also have a big impact on architecture, because it lets you do something which isn't really found in buildings at the moment, which is let through kind of soft dappled light, which should be delightful. But I'm very impatient to have a prototype in my hand, because I don't have one yet, but hopefully by December. Certainly I should have the prototype by March, because I'll be exhibiting a prototype publicly at a big trade show called Future Build on March the 1st. So that's the kind of time.
I really thank you, Luke. It's seriously fascinating. I do love architecture, so for me, it's quite easy to love it. But we do need a lighter construction, and also we do need much more light without using energy, right? Because energy consumption is really too high, and we need to reduce it as much as we can.
Yeah, so light pipes have definitely taken off. These little domes on your roof, and it captures the light and puts it in a metal mirror. It comes down to a light fitting. I think my issue with those, which are great, that it's energy efficient, environmentally very, very good. So they certainly get my thumbs up in that sense. But I think what I find disappointing about those systems is that the light that comes out looks so, it looks like an artificial light, basically. Which is why I'd like to combine it. If you have light shining right next to a leaf or through a leaf, and then if you're standing underneath a tree, and if it's a bit cloudy, the light that comes to the leaves is different. So if it's very sunny, I think that's what I'm keen to get. Is that?
May I ask you your go-to-market strategy? Because as I see your planning for 2024, it's almost emerging markets, okay, which is pretty understandable, because this is where more constructions will be built. Where would you like to start because you are going to have your, let's say, MVP beginning of 2022, and where do you think your first construction will be built?
Yeah, I think it probably, that's a good question, and I'm kind of working through that at the moment. There's two big reasons for expanding into Asia. So the one is that there's a huge amount of building work there. And the other is, just how great is it to build a thing from agricultural waste? And the answer to that is, well, it depends what would have happened to the agricultural waste if you hadn't used it. So in places where it gets burnt, your environmental impact is much greater than in places like the UK, where it really isn't burnt. But we're a UK-based company, so I think the first garden rooms will be sold in the UK. There are, so it might be sooner than 2024 that it gets started in India. It's a little premature to be talking about that, but some of the investors who are interested are already in India doing projects. So Plastics for Change, basically. So Plastics for Change is a great organisation. They essentially they make plastic wastes into a kind of pseudo commodity, if you like. So it's a commodity, but the price is inflated to maximise social and environmental impact. And they work to empower women in particular. So so a collaboration with them in India makes a lot of sense, and that might be something where we get started rather sooner than 2024. But in terms of having a product for the building trade, I think that won't be until 2024. There might be some things we can do before that, along the garden room line.
I mean, farmers are somehow crucial, right? How do you start industrializing? I mean, which means going from 1-2 building to create, as you show in your slides, almost working cities. I mean, start creating buildings after buildings. You need to create your supply chain. Can be an issue.
Yeah, so certainly farmers are critical, and I'm keen to find as many uses for mycelium biocomposite as I can. I think there's good reason to really worry about what's going to happen to all the crop residues, because at the moment, by far the main use of straw and maize stover and things like that is for animals, right? Animal bedding and animal feed. Often the straw is extremely poor as feed, but still is what it's used for. And because the cost of protein is just getting closer and closer to the price of sugar, because of precision fermentation. So if we can get lactose and albumin from yeast cheaper than we can get it from cow's milk and egg, then there's going to be, there's a huge market for crop residues is going to collapse. So I think it's very important that we do have uses for crop residues. I mean, partly for rural poverty, and also because if that stuff, if even more of it gets burnt, then that would really be a disaster. So yeah, what we do to grow that supply chain? Yeah, everything we can, I suppose. And again, it's very different in different parts of the world. So in the UK, it would be quite a different thing. The plan in the UK is it's associated with anaerobic digestion, because you can grow fungi on. Yeah. So anaerobic digestion, you collect your whatever it is, agricultural waste of various kinds, and you put it in a tank basically where the bacteria can eat it anaerobically, and you get heat and power. But bacteria can't eat cellulose or hemicellulose or lignin. They can't eat the woody bits of plants. And so you do end up with this fibrous digestate, which isn't really useful for much. But fungi will eat that. So people ought to be growing mushrooms on that and making material from that. So the plan really is is co-production. So I mean, people can grow mushrooms and sell the mushrooms, right? And they don't need me for that. But if they grow mushrooms in the right way, and if they grow the right kind of mushroom, then once you've harvested the mushrooms, what they were growing on is also useful. So yeah, I'm keen to get started on kind of joint venture schemes and get R&D tax credits and maybe some academic collaborations and things like that to strategize what farmers should be doing. And that's not where I plan to be making my money, but that's where that is critical for my business, because that's my supply chain. So essentially, I'm trying to get that to grow that supply chain as fast as I possibly can by telling other people how they could make more money.
How critical is price for you, and are you competitive on price?
Well, it's I think the price could get pretty low. It's a bit premature to say exactly how cheap it will be. So in terms of say the garden room kits, it's going to be quite a high margin kind of designer thing, right? So it's not going to be that cheap. And then, but in the longer term, I would expect to drive the margin down as it scales off, scales up. But the amount of plastic you need is not very much. It's a shell, and the infill is, I mean, extremely cheap, right? It's agricultural waste. So I think being price competitive with brick is plausible. Certainly in cities where, because a big part of the cost, if you want a brick wall, I think it's about £160 per square meter in the UK, something like that. But most of that cost is because you need a builder, and it's quite skilled work, and the time and all of this. So to build a structure in rural India out of this stuff is, I'd be pretty surprised if I could make it cheaper than brick, right? I assume they're going to be using brick for a while. But in a city where your building site is quite expensive, and speeding up construction is certainly valuable, I think it might well be as cheap as any other way of making
what
building.
comes into my mind is regulation. We have a very different regulation in building from one country to another. So I'm pretty sure you know very well the one UK. What happens when you go to Africa, when you go to India? Well,
if it's permitted to be used in the UK, it will certainly be permitted to be used in India or Africa, is what I'd say about that. So building regulations are just much more stringent here. So yeah, you're right, building regulations are different in different places, and the certification process, there are regional differences.
You will start for the most, strict, so it's easier to go.
Right. That's right. I'm not entirely sure what the launch. Launch product might be slightly different in different places. But the garden room kit, certainly if it's an infill, so a very typical way of making a building is you build your concrete shell, and then you've got your floors, and then you fill in the gap between floors by laying bricks, right? So if instead you're laying this stuff, if that's permitted in the UK, I'd be very surprised if anyone in India objected.
I do believe so. Yeah, I mean, UK probably is the one most regulated is UK.
Yeah. And there's different levels of difficulty. So for a high-rise building, for very good reasons, fire safety is really paramount, and that'll be a challenge to get it that fire safe. But for a low-rise building, I think it's should be.
I mean, without going through the financials, how much do you think you need, and do you have any message to investors or joint venture who can come with you in this venture?
Yeah, a message. That's a good question. Well, at this stage, I'm waiting to hear back from the grant application. It depends a bit, but it's kind of 150k, 200k, something like that is what I'm thinking at this stage. There's a lot of R&D to be done. So R&D tax credits in the UK are very favourable. Essentially you invest in R&D and get the money back. And the reason why there's lots of R&D is that there's all kinds of different waste streams that could be used. So how much money I need depends on exactly how many of the milestones I want to reach on this first phase. I mean, my sense is it will certainly be easier to raise money or to get a good market valuation when I actually have a prototype that I can show people.
Sure.
So I'm not trying to raise too much now, because I think I'll get a better deal later. I think I'd be interested to hear from investors, particularly people who are interested in a kind of joint venture or something.
I mean, if you have one line of elevator pitch, okay, what do you want to say to investors? Why did she give you the money or join you?
Well, I think the the two really key points is that I think reducing carbon emissions by 100 million tonnes a year, which would save about 100,000 lives a year, is plausible. And so that's a pretty extraordinary impact. And people spend about £2 billion a day on building envelopes. So its potential to scale is very great, right? Who knows how big it will get. And it's, should be glamorous as well, I think. Because certainly the early stage is all about workshops with high profile architects to try and get them to use it and think about using it, think about how it might be used. So,
Luke, thank you very much for coming to BizTalk. It's been a very great pleasure with you, and hope we can do another talk later on. Thank you so much.